A gift shows up at a small apartment in Gaza City, wrapped neatly, looking like something sent with care. Inside the box, cushioned in thick foam, rests a modern mobile phone, considered high-end for 1996. It comes with a leather case and a spare battery, the kind of extras meant to signal respect and importance. A small card sits on top, carrying a simple message. For your safety and success, from your friends in Damascus. The man's wife studies the device, turns it over a few times, taps the keys, and checks the screen. Nothing seems odd. It appears expensive, polished, and entirely fitting for a senior Hamas figure who often received tokens of gratitude from contacts outside Gaza. She leaves it on the kitchen table, planning to hand it to her husband when he returns from evening prayers, unaware that the object she is treating as a helpful gift is designed to kill him. Hidden in the phone's body is roughly 50 grams of military-grade RDX, a small processor tied into the ringer, and a detonator set to trigger on the 51st incoming call. The device has slipped across 3 different countries, moved through 5 intermediaries, and passed 2 security checks without raising suspicion. In roughly 72 hours, it will explode a few inches from Yahya Ayesh's head, ending the life of Hamas's chief bomb maker and exposing the lengths intelligence agencies will go to when turning everyday items into precise killing tools. This is the account of Operation IAB, an operation that took a family's normal routine and twisted it into a delivery route for assassination. It shows how Mossad manipulated personal ties, inserted itself into moments of domestic trust, and assembled a kill chain so detailed that even the last person holding the device did not realize she was transporting a weapon. The operation made something clear and unsettling about the kind of intelligence work shaping the late 20th century. The people closest to a target can become accidental participants in his death. In a world where technology mixes smoothly with deception, trust becomes one of the most fragile points in someone's defenses. To understand how the phone finally reached Yahya Ayesh, it helps to understand who he was and why Israeli intelligence saw him as a threat worth such a risky and morally complicated operation. Born in 1966 in the village of Rafat, near Ramallah, Yahya grew up in conditions familiar to many Palestinians of that generation. Daily life was marked by occupation, restricted economic options, and the constant presence of Israeli forces. His father earned a living in construction, working long days inside Israel proper, leaving before sunrise and returning after nightfall. The pay supported the family, but it also kept them in an unequal economic structure that shaped the region for decades.
His mother raised 7 children in a crowded home where pressure from the outside world pushed the family closer rather than pulling them apart. Yahya stood out early. Teachers spoke of him as the student who absorbed difficult material almost immediately, who kept studying long after classmates lost focus, and who treated learning as something serious and necessary rather than a chore. His intelligence, paired with discipline, set him on a path that would eventually make him one of the most capable and dangerous figures in the conflict. Precisely the reason an operation as complex as IAB was set in motion to stop him.
These officers reached out quietly to a minor Hamas logistics coordinator, someone whose job was to pass messages between the group's leadership in Damascus and its field units in the Palestinian territories. This coordinator sat low enough in the structure that he did not have full knowledge of Hamas's security habits or its more subtle authentication steps. But he carried enough trust that anything routed through him felt ordinary. His name carried just enough weight to make a message seem legitimate, while his lack of rank meant he was unlikely to notice irregularities that a senior figure might have caught. Through him, Mossad delivered a note claiming that top Hamas figures wanted to issue updated communication gear to several important operatives. Yahya Ayesh was on that list, and given his central role in the group's military efforts, the idea of providing him with better equipment sounded completely reasonable. The coordinator received instructions saying that a package would soon arrive by reliable couriers and that he should pass it along to Yaha's family. They would then hand it to him at the next meeting held under secure conditions. The coordinator accepted this without hesitation. There was no logical reason for him to imagine that Hamas leadership would use his name to help an Israeli plot. The thought alone felt so far-fetched that it never crossed his mind. His trust filled in the gaps where doubt might have appeared. The phone itself was prepared with extreme care. Every detail matched what one would expect from a high-quality device purchased through ordinary commercial channels. The box came straight from the manufacturer with Arabic manuals, a proper warranty card, a leather case, and a spare battery. Nothing looked disturbed. The seams were clean, the weight felt right, and the whole set looked exactly like something pulled from a store shelf. Anyone checking it briefly or even closely would see only a premium phone neatly packed and ready for use. A small greeting card inside added a personal touch. It carried a short Arabic note wishing Yaha strength in his ongoing fight and saying that supporters abroad admired his dedication and wanted him to stay effective and protected. The message fit the tone and style of what Hamas operatives sometimes received from sympathizers, so nothing in it sounded forced or suspicious. The package moved from Damascus through Jordan and into the West Bank along the same underground routes Hamas relied on for years. These channels handled documents, equipment, and money, and people along the way were used to seeing parcels that looked exactly like this one. Smugglers, couriers, and handlers treated it as routine cargo. No one opened it, questioned it, or lingered on it. It blended into the steady flow of items meant to sustain the organization's work. By the time it reached Kamal Ayash in late December 1995, the package carried the kind of normal wear that came from being passed through several hands. Kamal inspected it with the caution of someone who knew how advanced Israeli intelligence could be. He checked the box, studied the presentation, and took his time, aware that one careless moment could be deadly. Yet everything he saw matched what he expected from a genuine gift sent with good intentions, and nothing in the appearance of the phone hinted at the danger hidden inside. He lifted the box flap, took his time looking over the phone, and switched it on to see if it booted the way a normal device should. He checked the plastic inserts, the seals, the printed materials, and scanned every corner for anything that felt off. Nothing stood out. The device looked pricey and well put together, the kind of item someone in his position might expect to receive, a present from Hamas leadership to a trusted operative, nothing more. Kamal reached out to Yaha's father and told him a parcel had come from Damascus, along with instructions that it be passed straight to Yaha. The father set the process in motion, following the usual security chain that shaped all communication with his son. Messages moved through several handlers, each step shielded from the next. Meeting spots were picked at the very last moment and delivered through vague coded hints. People arrived in waves so no one trailed another. It was a system built to keep everyone breathing. In early January 1996, when Yaha's father finally met him inside a safe house tucked somewhere in the Gaza Strip, he handed over the phone and explained that it came from senior figures in Damascus who wanted to make sure Yahya had dependable equipment. Yahya held it like something that might bite. Paranoia had kept him alive, and he wasn't about to relax. He studied the casing, ran a finger along every seam, opened the battery slot, and went through the menus to see if anything felt strange. He pressed his father for details: who touched it, how it traveled, whether anyone along the route acted out of character. The answers lined up with what he expected. The parcel had moved through reliable Hamas channels, handled by people he trusted, and nothing hinted at interference. To him, it looked exactly as advertised, a useful piece of gear sent by supporters who wanted him to coordinate more easily. Over the next several weeks, Yahya used the phone often. He called other Hamas members to manage operations, picked up family calls, and handled the steady flow of communication he had to maintain even with all his usual caution. Every call went through without trouble. The battery held up, the signal stayed steady, and the sound came through clean. Nothing about it raised questions. By the time he had taken around 50 calls, he had grown used to the device in the same way people get used to anything they carry daily.
Whatever unease he felt at the start faded. The phone no longer seemed like a gift that needed suspicion. It was just another tool in his pocket, as ordinary to him as a watch on his wrist. Israeli intelligence monitored the device quietly, tracking when it turned on, which towers it latched onto, and the rhythm of calls moving in and out. They held back, waiting for a moment when they knew for sure Yahya had the phone in his hand, when he stood in a place where bystanders would not take the hit, and when their teams could confirm the outcome the instant it happened. On January 5, 1996, surveillance teams confirmed that Yahya had settled briefly in a safe house in the Beit Leah area of the Gaza Strip. The apartment belonged to a Hamas supporter who let him use it for a short stretch while he coordinated an upcoming operation. For once, he was there alone, which was unusual, since safe houses were normally shared by several people who added protection, kept watch, and helped wanted figures avoid attention. At exactly 9:32 a.m., a Mossad control center in Tel Aviv dialed the modified phone he carried. This was the 51st call made to that device since he had received it. Inside the phone, a small microprocessor logged the incoming call, recognized it as the 51st, and triggered the hidden detonator. The RDX charge went off with sharp, concentrated force. The blast ripped the phone apart, sent a violent shock through the room, shattered Yahya's skull, and killed him so fast he never had a chance to react. The explosion was tuned to be deadly, but not destructive beyond its target. It stayed tight enough that the apartment itself did not collapse, and people nearby were not seriously harmed. The design aimed to remove Yahya cleanly, avoiding the kind of collateral deaths that could have drawn harsh international backlash. Hamas members reached the apartment within minutes, pulled in by the sound of the blast. They found his body on the floor, his face destroyed by an explosion that had erupted only 6 inches from his head. The phone itself no longer existed as a usable object. It had been blown into tiny fragments, none large enough to reveal how it had been built or where it had come from. Palestinian authorities opened an investigation, but with no device left to examine, they could not reach firm conclusions about what mechanism had caused the blast. Israeli intelligence stayed silent in public, keeping to the usual practice of avoiding any acknowledgement. Inside intelligence circles, though, people treated the mission as a major technical and operational success, noting that it had bypassed strong security measures and shown how ordinary consumer hardware could be reshaped into a precise weapon.
Thousands gathered for Yahya's funeral in his home village, where mourners honored him as a martyr killed in the fight against Israeli occupation and vowed to take revenge. Hamas leaders said his death would not slow their armed campaign, but would push new attacks against both military and civilian targets. The Palestinian Authority condemned Israel for carrying out an extrajudicial killing inside Palestinian areas, arguing that such actions broke international law and undercut attempts to negotiate a peaceful end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But the criticism changed nothing on the ground and did not alter the course of events that followed. Israel had long held that anyone who planned or carried out attacks on civilians was a valid target, no matter where that person happened to be. That view never shifted, but reactions inside Israel were less uniform. Security officials saw the killing as a necessary move. They felt relief that someone tied to many civilian deaths and who had been preparing more strikes that would have claimed even more lives had finally been stopped. To them, the operation also showed how far Mossad's technical abilities had reached. It signaled to other militants that even careful planning and strict security routines could still be broken, and that Israeli intelligence would keep searching until it found a way to block threats against Israeli civilians. But many people still felt uneasy. The method used in the operation raised questions that were hard to ignore. Relying on family members who had no idea they were involved in an assassination pushed the ethical boundaries of intelligence work. It forced people to think about where the line should be drawn and whether it was acceptable to trick innocent relatives into helping carry out a killing. The strongest criticism focused on Kamal Ayyash and Yahya's father. Both had unknowingly carried the phone that later exploded. Once they learned the truth, the emotional blow was severe. Kamal broke down under the weight of guilt. Relatives said he seemed unable to function, as if the knowledge had torn something inside him. He stepped away from daily life, avoided gatherings, and drifted into a long period of deep depression. He could not make peace with the fact that his love for Yahya stood in direct conflict with what had happened. Even though he had not known the phone was a weapon, he blamed himself for being used in a way that led to his nephew's death. Yahya's father struggled in almost the same way. He mourned his son, but he also mourned the moment he had handed over the device, believing it was harmless. That thought followed him everywhere, turning his grief into something far heavier. Hamas opened an internal inquiry to understand how Israeli intelligence had managed to slip so deeply into their communication lines. They questioned the coordinator in Damascus who had arranged the phone's transfer.
In the end, they decided that he had either been working with Israel or had been drawn into the scheme without understanding what he was part of. Soon after the investigation ended, the coordinator vanished. No one could say with certainty whether Hamas had killed him for suspected collaboration or whether Israeli intelligence had moved him to safety to shield a valuable source. Afterward, Hamas set stricter rules. They demanded several layers of checks before accepting any equipment or communication from outside sources. Every device had to be reviewed and verified to reduce the chance that they would again rely on technology that could be compromised. Even with these changes, the shock from the operation lingered. The success of the tactic influenced later Israeli actions. The idea of using targeted, precise methods to reach specific individuals became more common. In the year 1997, Mossad tried to kill Khalid Mashal in Jordan with a toxic agent applied by operatives who pretended to be Canadian tourists. That attempt showed how the earlier operation continued to shape Mossad's approach, pushing them toward methods that mixed technical skill with direct human contact, even when the risks were high. The operation ended in failure after Jordanian security forces detained the operatives and recovered the antidote. Jordan then applied steady diplomatic pressure that pushed Israel to free imprisoned Hamas members in return for the operatives' release. In 2010, Mossad carried out the killing of Hamas commander Mahmoud al-Mabou in a Dubai hotel. They used a quiet suffocation method that at first looked like a natural death. Only later did forensic checks and hotel security footage show how complex the killing had been. The tapes exposed a large team of more than 24 operatives who had arrived in Dubai with forged passports and moved through the city in a coordinated way that hid their roles until the investigation pieced everything together. Questions over the ethics of Operation IAB still spark argument many years later. Intelligence officials often say the mission was aimed at a figure who, in their view, had overseen attacks that killed many civilians and was preparing further strikes that could have taken even more lives. From that angle, using relatives as unknowing carriers was seen as an unfortunate step forced by Yahya's tight security habits, which made direct access nearly impossible. Supporters of the operation claimed that its success blocked future attacks and prevented more deaths by removing someone whose technical ability and dedication made him extremely hard to replace inside Hamas military ranks. The handling of Kamal and Yahya's father, though, caused deep psychological harm. They were drawn into something they never agreed to and could not understand, and the shock of learning that they had unknowingly delivered the item that killed their own relative marked them for life.
To intelligence planners, this was collateral damage tied to broader strategic aims, but it left two innocent people carrying guilt for actions they had no control over. Critics say this approach crossed moral limits that should restrain intelligence work even in high-stakes situations. In their view, deceiving innocent family members stripped them of agency and violated basic ethical standards. They insist that no strategic goal justifies turning private trust inside a family into a tool for an assassination. The harm done to Kamal and Yahya's father, who had no link to Yahya's decisions and no way to defend themselves from manipulation by trained operatives, stands as proof of those boundaries being pushed too far. Using family bonds as an entry point, they argue, drags intelligence work towards simple cruelty and erodes the norms meant to keep such operations within some moral frame. The operation also highlighted how everyday technology could be twisted into hidden threats. Phones, laptops, tablets, and nearly any device with enough internal room to hide small components suddenly appeared vulnerable. This showed how consumer electronics had become part of an ongoing contest between intelligence services searching for new methods and targets, trying to protect themselves from unseen risks built into items they used every day. After Yahya's assassination, militants and terror networks around the world tightened their rules for handling electronic devices. They insisted that every unfamiliar phone or computer go through a full technical check by trained specialists before anyone touched it. These steps were meant to close obvious gaps, yet they also created new problems. Groups still depended on secure communication, and that meant using electronics. But those same tools could turn into hidden threats, and there was no simple way to remove that risk completely. The operation that reached Hamas by leaning on social engineering instead of pure technical penetration showed something these groups already sensed but rarely admitted. Human intelligence still carried weight in an era shaped by signals monitoring and cyber tools. Israel's advanced systems could scan calls, messages, and digital traffic across many channels, but none of that mattered without a solid grasp of Yahya's mindset. To get close to him, the planners studied how people trust each other, especially inside tight families. Even the most disciplined fighter keeps emotional ties, and those ties can open doors. A relative offering a gift looks harmless, and that small assumption can override years of caution. This made the point clear: no matter how much technology evolves, intelligence work still depends on people, how they think, how they act, how their relationships shape their decisions. The most secure target can still fall for a setup that feels personal and familiar, because psychological pressure often beats technical safeguards. Operation ECAB left a mark that went well past Yahya Ayyash's death. It pushed governments to reconsider how assassination fits into modern statecraft. Targeted killings were not new, but using a booby-trapped phone, blending consumer tech with social engineering and miniaturized explosives, showed a shift into territory older generations of intelligence officers would not have imagined. It was both an example of technical creativity and a warning about how far agencies might go, turning gifts into weapons, pulling families into deadly plots, and reshaping normal objects into devices meant to kill. For the people caught in the middle, there was nothing strategic about it, only damage. Kamal Ayyash spent the rest of his life knowing he had been used, unknowingly, to help Israeli intelligence reach his nephew. Yahya's father carried the pain of having handed over the phone that ended his son's life, a simple gesture of care twisted into an act he never intended. Their grief showed the part of intelligence operations that rarely gets counted, the moral weight that sits behind actions judged only by whether they succeed on paper. Losses like these are treated by intelligence services as unfortunate, yet they frame them as part of the cost of getting a mission done. The apartment where Yahya lost his life was patched up, given a quick overhaul, and then rented out again to people who never learned what had happened inside those walls. The phone setup that had been turned into a weapon in 1996 faded fast, overtaken within about a decade by smartphones carrying features that would have looked unreal to the engineers who once altered Yaya's device. Still, the basic lessons behind Operation ECOB held on. Trust can become the weakest point in any operation. Tools we carry every day can be reshaped into weapons that slip past nearly any safeguard. And agencies willing to exploit personal ties can reach objectives that ordinary military power cannot match. If this account of one of Mossad's most intricate operations kept your attention, you can keep following along so you don't miss future breakdowns of other missions that shifted how modern intelligence work is understood. If you want to support the effort that goes into piecing together these cases and looking at their ethical weight, let us know. And here's something to think about. How should the ethical lines be set in this field? Is it ever acceptable to pull family members into an operation without their knowledge when the target is a dangerous militant? Or does that step fall over a boundary that even national security should not cross? Leave your thoughts, because these issues grow sharper as technology makes targeted killing more exact and more routine.